Hello, and welcome to Supplemental Instruction at the University of North Georgia. In this video, we will cover the basics of planning for sessions. Throughout this video, we will refer back to various parts of the SI Foundations and Effective Learning Strategies videos, so please make sure you've watched those before moving forward. Also, please be prepared to take notes as this information will be used in orientation training and throughout the semester. Planning is a large part of what you'll do to prepare for sessions throughout the semester. In this video, we will cover the why behind planning, the basics, how to get started, expectations, various planning examples, logistics, and general tips that we've found helpful. First, I want to give you some time to think about why planning would be an important part of sessions. Feel free to pause the video for a minute to jot some ideas down. There are many reasons planning well for sessions is vital in your SI leader role, and I can't possibly list all of them here. We'll start with our main whys, though. First, as with anything, preparation is key to success in this role. While you're holding session, you'll encounter multiple scenarios that will require you to adjust what you originally planned. While it may seem that reality might make planning obsolete, it's actually the opposite. If you know exactly what the students need to get out of the session and some good ways to present the content, you'll be able to make those necessary adaptations in the moment, ideally with limited disruption to the student learning experience. Also, as we've already stated in previous videos, collaborative study allows students to more effectively and efficiently use their time, but that's only if the group stays on track. Planning provides that direction to maximize student learning. Finally, knowing your plan allows you to be more present with your students. This means that you'll be able to recognize those little tells that show what students need more or less work with. Next, solid planning helps enhance the student experience in session. Variety in the learning process benefits students, and in a lot of ways, it's what makes SI unique and effective when compared to other academic success programs. Any student can find a worksheet online or do practice problems from a textbook or flip through note cards or a Quizlet deck. They don't necessarily need us for that. It's important to note here that that doesn't necessarily mean those study techniques are not helpful and effective in certain contexts, or that you shouldn't ever use them in session. But you have the ability as the SI leader to model different techniques for your students and to get them interested and engaged in the learning process and in working with their peers. Being creative and intentional can help your students better retain information and take ownership of their own learning. And it'll be more fun for everyone. Finally, we plan so that we can be good stewards of the resources in front of us. I'm not just talking about financial resources here, although those are important too. When a student walks into session, they are giving you two of their most valuable resources, their time and their trust. From those things stem so many more things like their confidence, their grades, or even their futures. We want to make sure that they're investing wisely. Further, you're investing your time into your role in SI. We want you to get as much from this experience as you possibly can, and we recognize that while it's a high impact role, it can also be high demanding at times. We want you to be a good steward of your own time by planning in an efficient and effective manner. It's also important to be a good steward of the resources provided by the SI department and UNG. So when you think about planning, we want you to remember this objective. You plan to create a positive experience and effective session environment where student learning is emphasized and enhanced to further the overall goal of SI, to help our students become independent learners. Everything we do goes back to that. So now that we know some reasons why it's important to plan, let's look at some planning basics. First, think back to the parts of session. Remember that we always want to be intentional with these activities, specifically thinking about the purpose of each one. Refer back to the SI Foundations video for a more in-depth look at the parts of session. Each session should include one opening activity, 1 to 3 main content activities, and 1 closing activity. You can see the ideal timing for the parts here, but know that you can be as flexible as long as the activity is accomplishing the goal of the specific part of session and that all parts of session are present. Next, and we know this one is difficult for many of our facilitators, don't do for students what they can do for themselves. We know that you think you're helping them, but it's important to remember that a bulk of learning, especially early learning, happens in the creation. When you go through notes to create a study guide, or put together Quizlet flashcards, or compile a list of test questions, you're taking away the student's ownership of that process. Again, we are not saying to never create resources or bring things to session, but think through what the students could gain if they did it themselves with you acting as a guide through the process. Upload all resources, including answer keys. This will help you stay present in session and can make session run more smoothly. If you're having them solve a problem, make sure that you have all the steps in your planning so you have direction if something goes wrong in session. We encourage you to exhaust other resource options before creating your own. Spend your time planning, working through problems, or creating an answer sheet as opposed to creating everything from scratch. Finally, plan for multiple scenarios. Sessions will not always go exactly as you've planned, so make sure to at least think through possible adaptations. Here are some examples. For an unexpected group size, we see a lot of facilitators default to using group-based CLTs. That's not always a bad thing, but consider other options, like breaking the content up into a jigsaw, assigning students to clusters, or use turn to a partner for smaller group sizes. Or you could even set up stations around the room to let individual students or groups work at their own pace. You might hold a session with only one student. You can still stay true to the collaborative SI model, even with only one student. Try acting as the second student so that you can stick to your planned activities. You should also lean into the facilitation strategies so that it doesn't turn into individual tutoring or a question and answer session. You should still follow your plan, even if there's only one student. You created that plan with intention and should go with it. And while we always hope that students will come to session with at least a base knowledge of the content, we know that doesn't always happen. For those unprepared students, especially if you have a lot of them, consider adjusting the activity to be more of a note review so that the students are quote unquote forced to go back through their notes. This could also help them learn to prepare for future sessions on their own. You can also try something like popcorn reading if they haven't yet read a required chapter or section of the textbook, or pull up D2L and have them make outlines of the resources or class PowerPoint. And remember, you can always ask your SI lead team if you need help brainstorming different activities for unexpected session scenarios. Now let's actually get started filling out a planning sheet. You'll find your planning sheet in Teams. Refer to the technology pre-orientation training video for details on how to locate your planning folder, sheets, and master planning list. This is UNG-SI's planning sheet, and it's what you'll complete for each session that you hold. At the top, you'll see the session details. Please make sure to fill all of these out for every sheet. Pro tip, you may want to start the semester by editing the template with your name, instructor, and course, so that every time you copy the template, those areas are already complete. Just make sure to update this each semester. For each session, you'll need to set a specific goal or objective and identify the learning outcomes. This helps give direction for the activities you'll use in session, and everything that they do should relate back to this goal or outcomes. Think about what content or technique you want your students to leave session having a better understanding of. Why is this important for their learning overall? As an example, instead of master chapter 13, set your goal as students should be able to identify the steps of mitosis and the order that they occur and clearly identify what happens in each step. This gives concrete explanations and expectations around session. Next, you'll highlight the parts of the study cycle that the students are currently in. Is the content new? Are they getting close to a test? What kind of understanding do the students need to have for that specific content? We have this at the top of the planning sheet so that you can think about where your students are at in the study cycle and use that information to inform the activities that you choose for your session. The activities you plan when your students are in the attend phase may be different than if they are in the study or assess phase with that same content. Then we move on to the specific parts of session. Each part of session will be a different activity. Remember, you should always have an opening, at least one main, and a closing. Think back to the SI formula from the SI Foundations video. Facilitation strategies plus learning strategies plus CLTs equal an SI session activity. Keep that in mind as you move through creating your activities. First, you'll start out listing the specific content for the activity. Refrain from using generalized terms here, like Chapter 5 or Thursday's lecture. Next, you'll want to think about your CLT and learning strategy. These should always pair well together, and there's no right place to start. Some facilitators will choose the CLT first, others the learning strategy. It's a personal preference. Just make sure that they make sense when put together. For example, it probably wouldn't be best to pair a Kahoot learning strategy with an individual presentation CLT. Time management is key to successful sessions. You want to make sure that you're considering the time that students need to properly complete an activity. Pro tip, put specific timestamps in your planning so that you're not having to think about it during session. You'll know that you have until 5:20 to complete the activity before you need to move on to your closing. We also want to think through how or where you'll redirect students. Again, be specific. The point is that you go into session not really having to think about where to find specific content when you have to refer students to their notes or other resources. This helps session run more smoothly and can save a lot of time, especially if you have unprepared students. It will also help students learn techniques for logically thinking through what resources are available and how to find them. Next, you'll describe in detail the actual activity and how you ideally envision it running. Think it through and write it out, including anticipated timeframes. This is likely where you'll put the bulk of your information. The check for understanding box is next. This is where you'll think through how the students are learning the content and how they're proving their knowledge of the content. This box should always relate back to your overall session goal and learning objectives. There's no right way to complete this box. It truly is individual preference, but make sure it's clear to you and others. Will you ask follow-up questions? What are those questions? Will you have the students put the concept in their own words or teach it back to the class? How will you determine which student or students need to do this? Write down examples and your expectations for the students, and then make sure that they meet those expectations or know where to go for further study before moving on to the next activity. Learning preferences are important, and we want you to think through them. When selecting a learning preference for your activity, you should be thinking about how your students are actually processing the material. If you have your students moving from one side of the room to the other, but they're audibly explaining the contents, once they get to one side of the room, they are processing the material auditorially, not kinesthetically. That being said, it is never a bad idea to get students up and moving during session, even if that's not how they're processing the material. As you move through the semester, you'll learn which preferences work best for your students, but you'll also want to switch it up on them. Think about how the content is best learned. Would they most benefit from visualizing a diagram? Would creating a model of a cell help make it real for them? Do they need to focus on memorization and repetition? Would talking a concept through with their peers be most beneficial? Asking questions like these can help you create intentional learning opportunities for your students. Next, you'll need to attach any resources that are needed for the activity, most often in the form of a link. This could be a link to a video, a worksheet, a completed example, a photo, really anything. But you should always have something linked if it's not already worked out in the description section. Resources attached to planning sheets are required as part of our accreditation, so it's important that you always include them. Finally, where did you get the resource if needed? Remember, smarter, not harder. You don't need to create everything yourself, but you do need to put where it's from. Did you create it? Did you get it from your instructor? Teams resources, ChatGPT? Just make sure to cite it. You'll repeat that process for each activity. At the end of the planning sheet, there's a space to include general session resources like a session PowerPoint or additional information that would be helpful to you and your students. Remember, the point is to do the work in planning so that you can basically relax in session. There is a planning sheet tips and guide document in the planning folder in Teams. There is even more information in this resource, so I strongly encourage you to review it before orientation training and throughout the semester. Next, I want to briefly cover admin's expectations where planning is concerned. Before I start reviewing our expectations, I want to make it clear that if you ever have any questions about this list or feel inordinate pressure to deliver on this list, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will provide all the support we possibly can. Our first expectation is detail. Everyone will see detail a little differently, and we'll show some examples later, but I encourage you to think of detail in a concise manner. We don't expect long, drawn-out explanations of activities, but we do expect you to think through how the activity could go in real time, how the students would and should work together, how the activity contributes to the learning outcomes of the session, how the activity supports the content, and how the students will benefit overall from the activity. Time management will always be important for session, so consistently think through this when planning. You can expect that your students will need about double the time that it would take you to complete a problem, especially if they're early in the study cycle, so plan accordingly. Don't plan too little or too much. Creativity is important. As reviewed before, creative activities can help students better retain information and have more fun overall when learning. Not all activities have to be games or competitions. There are times when the best way to cover a concept is through straight board work or practice quizzes. But there are also times when the students will benefit most from stepping out of their learning comfort zones. You'll hear SI admin talk about this a lot. We expect intentionality and thoughtfulness always. This will serve you and your students in the long run. Don't just throw something together, even though the semester will get busy and you'll be tempted to do so. Really think about what your students need in that moment. Think about what the content needs. Consider what your professor would want them to know about the content or how it may appear on upcoming exams. It's always a good idea to meet with your paired faculty and brainstorm different ideas. They can be your best resource when prepping to plan for session. And never forget about your SI lead team. Your mentors and SI admin are here to help you at any point. And finally, you'll hear us talk about planning with different building materials metaphor, lovingly adapted by a past senior mentor from the Three Little Pigs story. We want you to use sturdy materials when building a plan. Think wood and brick. So what are those materials? If you remember the story from childhood, the Three Little Pigs build houses out of different materials, specifically straw, sticks, and brick. Along comes a big bad wolf who wants to huff and puff and blow their little houses down. In the story, only the brick remains standing. We think of planning in a similar way. There is planning made of straw, we adjusted sticks to wood, and then planning made of brick. Your goal is to reach brick planning. This means that there is enough detail and intentionality in your planning that it can withstand outside forces trying to huff and puff and blow your session to the ground. Wood planning, especially as you're starting in the SI leader role, is also acceptable, and there is always a level of subjectivity when determining the quality of a plan. We do want to make it clear, however, that we do not expect you to build a planning mansion. You don't need a house reinforced with steel and concrete. Mansion planning will never be rewarded on our team. Next, I'll show you some examples of sturdy planning, and I'll outline our reasons for each one. You'll notice that the activities are planned differently, and that's okay. You should structure your plans however is best for you. Our first example comes from a standard English grammar session. Pause the video to read through the plan. As you can see, this facilitator has listed out steps that they'll use throughout the activity in paragraph form. They have given specific answers to their questions. The facilitator has thought through the brainstorm part of the activity at 5 minutes. There are specifics on how they want their students to cover the information, and they've listed out some general check for understanding questions. The learning preferences are correct since the students are writing out a cheat sheet and talking it over as a group discussion. The timing makes sense as an opening activity, and the students will be able to use the cheat sheet for the remainder of session as they dive deeper into expletives. I would consider this to be wood planning. The next activity is from a human anatomy class. The facilitator is asking the students to play a game of charades. Pause the video to read through the activity. This activity works well as a main content activity because it requires the students to put the content into practice with charades. There are specific time expectations throughout the activity. The facilitator has thought through group sizes and how the students will work together in their small groups and with the large group overall. There are specific instructions and rules for the students. The checks for understanding are primarily follow-up questions, and it's clear that the students should be able to connect all of the regions. Assuming attachments are included, another anatomy facilitator could lead this activity. This activity has aspects of wood and brick. The next activity is even more detailed with written adaptations and more specific check for understanding questions. Pause the video to review it. In this activity, the students are creating comics for permeability definitions. There are specific time expectations throughout the activity. The facilitator has also thought through and written down multiple scenarios that could be helpful during session. I really like the check for understanding part of this activity. There are clear questions that the facilitator knows they can check or ask for. Once the students have covered this information, the facilitator will know that they can move on from the activity with confidence in their students' knowledge. This is brick planning, almost leaning into mansion. Not all facilitators will reach this level of detail in their planning, and that's okay. If planning is something you're really interested in, you can set specific goals to work up to this level of detail. Next, here are some basic logistics of planning. First, you should spend about the same amount of time planning as you would running a session. So for a 50-minute session, spend about an hour planning. That is the goal you're working towards. When you start out in the role or with a new course, it may take you longer to plan at first. Make sure to claim the time you spend planning on your hours log. We want planning to be something that takes off pressure instead of adding it, so let your SI lead team know if you need help with planning. We have mentors who are specifically interested in planning who would be happy to step in and help. All planning sheets should be submitted on your master planning list before your session starts. The best practice is 24 hours prior to session to allow time for the plan to marinate, but the plan should always be attached before your session starts. Never walk into session without a plan. Finally, here are some general tips that we've found to be helpful in planning. First, you don't always have to plan in order. There is a technique in pedagogy called backwards planning, where you start with what you want them to end up with and plan back from that. This may be a helpful technique, especially if you're having trouble connecting your activities to the overall session goal. Second, start thinking about planning during lecture. Come up with a system that you can use while taking notes in lecture that'll make it easier to find concepts to cover in sessions and potential learning strategies you can use. Third, keep a running document of activities that you and your students like so you don't have to write out the instructions on every planning sheet. If you're planning to do an Instagram story learning strategy, keep the instructions in a running document, copy and paste them into the current planning sheet, and then just adjust the CLT and content on the individual planning sheet. Next, feel free to share your plans with your professor and get their input. This is not a requirement, and you should never rely on your professor to help you with planning or give you materials or ideas. But if they're open to it, use them as a resource. Most professors want to know what's going on in session. It can even help them better prepare for lecture. Talk to your professor about this early in the semester so that you know their expectations. After you've come up with the learning strategy and CLT you want to use and have a general outline of what you want the students to do, put it into an AI generator like ChatGPT or Copilot and ask it to give you clear instructions. Most generative AI will know the basic CLTs and learning strategies, and you can tweak it from there. Always make sure to check the work though. AI makes mistakes all the time. Finally, pay attention to what your students like and lean into those activities. I don't mean to do the same activities over and over, but you want your students to enjoy session and get the most out of their attendance. If something works, go with it. Add a different activity in here and there so that students don't get bored and you're trying something new. You never know what will click for them. But don't focus so much on variety that you forget to do what's best for the content and the students. And that's it for our introduction to planning. I hope that now, having completed this video, you have a stronger understanding of why and how we plan for sessions. We're excited to see how you put this information into practice. See you at orientation training.